The first question is, what is needed to revamp, to increase the production in the water?
In the fastest way possible, but of course attending the safety and environmental issues that it requires in these operations. Paco, do you want to start?
Sure. So basically, I think that this is a very interesting question. I think that there's several aspects that you need to look at in answering that question. The first thing is, it's interesting that it's posed as what do we need to do in the fastest manner, the fastest, most efficient manner. And when you look at it like that, I think that the answer involves several factors. There are several ways you could look at it, and it really may be answered differently by different people. For example, if you ask this question to Pemex, Pemex may say certain things that are important to Pemex based on the realities of Pemex. Now, from a Talos perspective, as an international oil and gas company, I could talk about what we see from that context. And so when you ask me, well, what is it that needs to be done? Well, part of it is a recognition that, to really develop it in a sustainable manner, in a very quick and efficient manner, it might be that it requires the involvement of multiple parties. This is not something that Pemex alone could do. This is going to take a combination of efforts by various parties. And so it starts with that. Beyond that, I think that one of the key things that we need to continue seeing from an operator standpoint is the opportunity to actually participate. And this comes in through access to additional opportunities and to continue seeing access to those. I think that is important. Now, that's obviously at a very high level, at a super macro way of looking at things. More at the micro, there's a combination of things that right now we are dealing with, and obviously, as you know, Talos is one of the early players. We, with our friends at E&I and Pan American and Fieldwood, amongst others, we're dealing with the fact that right now, obviously, there is a period of uncertainty. We're in a period of time that we have a combination of the start of this development with the transition in the Mexican government, and that creates uncertainty. Well, we need to have that definition to begin to evolve, to see what is it that is actually going to be the frameworks that are going to continue. Beyond that, if we look at other themes that are important to us, I think it's going to be, once we start getting into the executional, we really need to address that, as more and more players are moving into development, that puts a lot of pressure and stress on the regulators, on the authorities that are going to be looking at these plans, make the approvals, reviewing. It puts pressure there. Beyond that, it's going to put pressure on the value chain itself, making sure that there's going to be some natural bottlenecks in terms of that might limit how fast development might happen, so it's addressing those issues. One of the issues that is also going to be very important is access to midstream. Right now, some of the areas don't have midstream infrastructure, specifically around gas. Having access, developing that access will be important. And lastly, I think one of the things that is also going to be important is basically the security of investments. People like us are always going to be interested on that theme. We need to continue seeing contracts that are bankable, that are going to be something that we can provide the proper guarantees, that the investors have the proper guarantees, that their investments are going to be there. So that's kind of
okay. Thank you, Luis Manuel. Do you want to share with us from the perspective of service and companies?
Thank you. Well, the way that we see it is that the benefits that we may try to have with the energy reform, we have not seen it yet. It's even though there are 3 or 4 companies or petroleum companies that are already working in the areas, in the shallow waters, but we don't see really a major benefit. We know the reason is the crude prices just started up to grow, and then it's something that we may expect next year to have a better benefit. As Paco said, one doubt that we have is the new government. We don't know exactly what is the way that he is going to proceed. So far that we have heard from the different players that they will be in the top management of the government. Some of them, they have the tendency that the reform is good, and that if they enforce in some way much more dedicated how the energy has to be performed, then there will be a benefit for the industry. So far, that we have seen as a service providers is that the last year was not so bad for us for the entrance of the new petroleum companies that help a lot in having a good result. But this year has been very slow, and we feel that the main reason is they didn't know who will be the winner of the president, and then now that they have it, and then I think that the things will move faster. Thank you.
Thank you. Merlin, do you want to share with us from the perspective of the Ministry of Energy, which could be those actions that could leverage and ramp up the production in shallow water?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, a little bit, maybe a little bit closer.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having us here. It's a great pleasure speaking about shallow water development for us as the ministry. And yeah, we at the ministry, we run forecast every year after year. And the way we see shallow waters, and by the way, you can download this if you just Google Prospectivas CENER, you would see the forecast that we run. And the last one we ran was back in December 2017. And basically what we were saying, or we were seeing back then, is that if we were to continue business as usual, there's no doubt that shallow water will dip. Production will decline eventually, and then what we have today, it's about 80% of national production. This will go to about half of it, no, along with everything else. Nonetheless, there are opportunities out there, and the way we see that these opportunities can be managed are through, as Paco and Luis have been saying, the help of everybody. We literally need everybody here in this room. We need Pemex, we need the new service providers, we need the operators that have won the last 22 shallow water blocks, and we need the people that are looking at Mexico and seeing the 5-year plan and the potential bidding rounds in the future to come and give a lending hand. It is without the help of everybody that we will not be able to keep the current production of around 1.5 million barrels of oil in shallow water only. And that's with regards to the actual producers, but in reality we need the service companies, we need the community, we need the regulators. That's it. I mean, it's an easy way to sum it up, but in reality we do need everybody.
Thank you. Let's move to the second question. We will have two perspectives of the question. The first one is more from the service company's perspective, and the question is, how are the service company preparing for this new phase, interacting with several companies, not only one big one like Pemex in the past? And maybe, Luis, you can answer from the service provider company, and then Paco can talk about which are the expectations from the operators. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, the way that we see it is we are in a learning curve, really. It's because even though some of our members in the chamber, they have already some contact with the international market. Really, that we are having right now is a complete new phrase that we have right now with the new entrants in Mexico. That we have learned from there is that the way that they are trying to come to Mexico is to be in a more program way. That makes a lot of difference from us, because in some way we have more time for planning the requirements from the different clients that we may have, but also at the same time they give us some time for preparing our ships, preparing our services, in order that we can afford the contracts that they are having. Other major change that we have seen is that we cannot go only to supply, let's say, the the chips that they require for the service. We have to do something integrated, a logistic integration that in order to have not only the vessels available, but also all the services they need in land, and storage and everything. And then in some way, we are changing completely in the way that we are working in the past. And at the same time, we feel that we are becoming much efficient. And at the same time, we are having more possibilities to have additional clients that we have in the past. That we see right now is that as the pricing is really pressing us a lot, it's also another way that we are learning to work. Is in some way when we were in the past working for Pemex, we knew exactly what were the costs that we have related with the project we were working. Right now, with the new companies that are coming to Mexico, they give us more time in order to have a better planning and a better things in the services that we are providing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this question, I still, for me, it's an interesting question. Obviously, this is a question that is best answered by the service companies. Yet, and as part of my growing up in the industry, most of my career I have spent on the service side. So I do have a pretty good understanding of that side of the business. But I look at it in a variety of ways. You can look at the service sector and say, okay, what does it need to do to really take advantage of this? And part of it is, maybe the way to look at it is to break up the service sector by saying, okay, there's a group of companies that have traditionally done work for Pemex in Mexico for years and years and years. And so the question then becomes, if you're going to be working with an international company like Talos or anyone else, you have to be ready to meet kind of some of the ways that we pre-qualify and contractors, which could be different from Pemex. Standards, it could be, for example, information with regards to safety. It could be information with regards to even some basic stuff around compliance, etc. It's just different. There's another group of companies that have been waiting for companies, again, international companies, to come into Mexico, to then follow them into Mexico. And those companies that have not worked in Mexico need to realize that, okay, working in Mexico does have certain requirements. There's some things that they need to do with the government. There are certain things that they need to understand norms, they need to understand regulations, and so there's an educational process. And of course, there's a third group of companies that are used to doing both. And those companies, yeah, they're pretty well set, but the reality is there's going to be capacity issues. They need to start looking at what is it that they can be doing, where are they going to hit limits in terms of production capacity, because at the end of the day, we think, it's what we want is obviously, and we're fortunate that we're at the head of what we think is going to be a lot of activity, and we hope that there's a lot of activity. But there's going to be a very strong demand for people to cover the gaps when we hit those bottlenecks. So it's really preparing ahead of time, realizing what's coming, and hopefully people are looking at that, because managing those issues will be important.
Thank you. Merlin, maybe the system that you present us in the previous meeting is good to talk about this system in this question, because it's like the preparation of this service company. Do you agree to compare
Sure.
Share with us about the system?
Sure. I just want to comment on Paco's last comment. I do agree that when you look at Mexico and the way the operations are here, you shouldn't just think that just because I'm a driller and I've been drilling all over the world, I'm going to succeed in Mexico. Yes, Mexico has one of the biggest success rates in the world in terms of exploration wells. Nonetheless, as I was speaking to a friend of mine from the service industry, he was telling me, you have carbonates and then you have Mexican carbonates, and it's totally different. So when you talk about landing and creating a soft landing in Mexico, service companies are a good way to segue in, and that's something that I would like to just leave it out there, even though I don't work there. And one thing that we're working with, in this case with the CNH, and in order to plan, specifically to plan demand for the complete supply chain for goods and demands. If you guys go into the CNH website, in the main page, there is a link to a platform that is called Plataforma de Bienes y Servicios, where you could actually see, based on all of the different approved plans from Pemex and from the new operators, how do we forecast that demand. So basically what we did is we took the production forecast, then we disaggregated that into wells. So we have 21 different types of wells, from shallow water to deep water to onshore, unconventional, workover, you name it. 21 different ones. So you basically can filter what type of wells you want, or what type of service, of what type of good it is that you are keen based on the industry you work on. And then look at what the industry demands for the next 5 to 6 years. I really encourage everybody to look at this platform. It's still in its infant stages, in the sense that we just rolled it out. I know some of the people here saw it last week in CNH, but I would really encourage feedback from the platform. It is meant to help everybody here and give a little bit more of the visibility of how Mexico will develop in the service sector.
Yes, what I saw is that it's a perfect starting point for the service and devices and equipment and spare parts companies in order to plan the sales plan or budget plan. So it's a perfect starting point, that the information that you provide.
If you don't mind me adding, it is based on different premises. So you need to be mindful of that. And there's a whole document once you go into a platform of what are those assumptions. So you need to take that carefully. Now, one of the main things to take into consideration is this is only indicative. It doesn't mean that if you are, say, a valve supplier or a tubing supplier, if you if you mine barite or bentonite or whatever it is that you're looking for, that exact quantity, be it units, tons, or whatever, that's exactly what the country will demand. Now, the second disclaimer I do want to make is that in reality, just a second, I forgot the second disclaimer. We are only mapping demand. And what you need to do as a service provider is see how it matches with the supply. You know, a few years ago, not a few, more like 5 years ago, 5 to 6 years ago, we were drilling at a pace of 1,400 wells per year. Today, we're only at a fraction of that. So that means that there is supply in Mexico to ensure that we can drill those 1,400 wells. So it's not because we are saying, okay, we're gonna need 5, 10, or 2,000 valves in the near future, that there's nobody to supply them. So you need to be mindful of that, so that whenever you go out into the market, you cross-check supply and demand.
Very good, thank you. Let's move to the third question, and it's related to the experience and knowledge that the current service companies already have providing services mainly for Pemex, and how can they leverage this experience, knowledge to the new private companies coming to operate in shallow waters? Do you want to start?
Sure. I think, you know, it's, in fact, I think there is a lot of value in that. I mean, we think we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know, and we realize that. And so it's a very simple thing to say, but it's a very important thing to say. Working with people and with companies that have experience in Mexico is of tremendous value to us, because they provide information. And so when we look at, you know, the whole process of development, from planning to execution to operations, there's a lot of areas where there's value in the participation and the knowledge that that previous experience brings. For example, we are going to be dealing and having to deal with Mexican norms, Mexican regulations, working with companies that are familiar with that. Not only is it important so that we make sure that we are dealing appropriately and effectively with them, but also that we identify areas where, it's understanding where, we typically say we're going to be working to international standards. We need to understand when those standards may be different to Mexico, why are they different, and how would they impact that? And we need to be able to plan accordingly during the planning phase. We also need to understand that, local companies also have a better understanding of some of the local risks than we do. So for us, it's always important, as we go through the risk planning and starting to get all the risk management processes, as we go through execution, we expect our service providers to, and our companies that are going to be supporting us, to really guide us through some of the issues to avoid any kind of additional risk or potential mistakes just because we just didn't know. It's a brand new area for us. I could give you the analogy of previous experience where going into Brazil, and we were looking at developing a port in Brazil, and we were well into the way of investing, only to come out after talking to local service companies that say, hey, the locale that you're looking at has environmental issues that you need to consider that may not have been obvious had you not had previous experience here. And so it's helping in that process during that area where we're planning and moving forward with that. It's important. During execution, obviously, people that know how to work in Mexico will bring in a lot of value because, again, during execution is about working here, understanding how to get things done here, doing them right. And again, that whenever we, there's a network of relationships that might be useful, whether it's dealing with ports, whether it's dealing with, again, with the uncertainty and the realities of executing a project. And one of the areas that is really interesting is now going into the future, everything, you're now into operations. Obviously for companies like us, coming down here requires a view that we're going to be here for a long time. And so we are having to establish an operational presence here. And in that regard, there may be opportunities to say, well, okay, we can do it ourselves, or there's opportunities to leverage the presence, the established presence of particular companies where, for example, there's a better way of handling issues like logistical support to existing operations, whether it's handling of equipment inventories and maintenance. All those issues become quite interesting for us. So obviously, for us, the previous experience and the experience that Pemex has, we come here to learn as much as to, everybody's always saying, hey, what are the international standards or what are the international best practices that you're going to bring to the table? Yes, we're going to be bringing a lot of that, but we also want to learn, and it's important for us.
Luis?
Well, the experience that we having so far with the new entrance here in Mexico as a service provider has been very good. I think this has been a learning process for everybody. The foreign companies, they were afraid of many things that they didn't know how to work in Mexico, and that's where really we have accomplished these doubts that they have it. And the way that we see it right now is that they look us as a partner, not so as a service provider. Then that has helped a lot because the requirements that they have, they are sharing in advance, and also at the same time they have more contact with us in order to make these things easy. On regards of, for example, the Mexican laws, they have so many doubts on how really they can operate. For example, companies that come from the United States, they are used to work with the U.S. Coast Guard or with some of the authorities in America. But once they come to Mexico and they have to deal with the Secretaría de Marina or the Secretaría de Comunicaciones y Transportes, then that makes a lot of difference. And this is why we have been helping a lot to those companies. And in some way, they trust on us in order to facilitate the work. Also, the other thing that we have seen completely different from the experience that we have from Pemex is that when they are going to start a new development, that they do is they select the service provider much point in advance. They require some additional issues on safety and health, but at the same time, they go and follow some international rules that for us, in some way, we didn't deal with that rules here in Mexico, but they are very easy to apply because in some way we already have all those rules, and the only thing that we have to do is put it in one document, and that way we can work with them. The other thing that they require is a lot of certification. That we have seen on that respect is that many of the service providers that working here in Mexico for Pemex, they also work in the foreign countries. And then that really, for some of our companies, has been very easy to enter to that requirements and to comply with them. And it's, as I will say, is as long as we keep this communication, the work can be done very good, and we are going to learn much more faster than this is required so far.
Good. Merlin?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm not the only one in a transition period here. No, I just want to add a little bit of data in terms of service companies dealing with Pemex. Over the last 5 years, half of the completions for Pemex are done by a service company. A quarter of the wells are drilled by a service company. So when I think about how to land, and this goes back to, once again, Paco's comment, I would leverage from that expertise. There is a lot to learn from that ground that has been already covered. Just want to mention that. Well,
Very good.
I'll add a little
Go
bit
ahead.
more. Where specifically could you leverage here? And specifically talking about shallow waters, and where do we need help as a country? And I will say it the way it is, it's pretty much everywhere. From the moment you start characterizing your reservoir, as most of you experts know, naturally fractured reservoirs are hard to characterize. I don't think all of the grounds have been covered in terms of getting into squeezing the last drop out of this. Same goes for drilling. There is a lot of advantage we could take from best practices that come from all over the world and from the local expertise here. I am yet to find somebody that says that, no, I don't want to optimize my flat times or my ROP or you name it, no. There are a lot of areas to innovate. And last but not least, in terms of production, whenever you think of the recovery factors that we have, in Mexico we have approximately 21% of recovery factor from our different fields all over the world, Mexico. That doesn't mean that that's a specific case of shallow waters. Shallow waters range from single digit all the way to 60s and upwards, but there's still opportunity of improvement in terms of production there. So we welcome all of these expertise, and I'm sure service companies will be able to provide a good help here.
Thank you. And the last one is, how can major discoveries like Sama and Amoca can be translated into long-term and sustainable production activities? Paco, do you want to start?
Yes, I'll go ahead and take a lead on this. And as I think everybody in this room is aware, Sama, yes, is a major discovery, and we're very proud of having made that discovery, and we're very fortunate for having made that discovery. It came through a lot of hard work and effort. And we realized that being kind of in this early stage and being one of the first movers, it does create a lot of advantages, right? There's going to be others when we're all going to be fighting for resources. Well, we think we're going to be ahead of the curve, and that's great. But it also brings in a lot of responsibility, right? And we're humbled with the fact that our discovery is going to be one that hopefully not only reaffirms the reform and the expectations for the reform, but it's also an example. We think that could serve as an example of what can be done. And so we recognize that responsibility, and it's something that we hold very dear to us, and we have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but all to the stakeholders, the government, our partners. We realize what we're bringing to the table. Obviously, being a first mover in this or an early mover, I should say, is we're all breaking ground in a lot of ways. And this has been a process in which we have been working in a very collaborative manner with the government, with the regulators, and really, you know, some of the things that we're experiencing right now is we realize that we are setting, what we're doing right now is setting an example or a potential benchmark or a potential standard for others that will eventually benefit from. And so when we are doing this, one of the constants, and I think it's consistent across the board, is we all want to get it right. And so we think that you know, we're in a position here that by providing that example to show that it can be done well, it's only going to encourage others to continue developing. And the proof is I think as an example is, just look at the tremendous success of 2.4. You know, it's like people realize, hey, you know, these guys found this. There's really, and so the interest on 2.4 really is an example of, hey, this is happening, and it's more than just conversation. It is for real. There's real value here, and again, this is setting that groundwork. Now going into the more tangible, of course, when you look at Mexico and Mexican infrastructure, you know, we all know that Pemex has its set of infrastructure that has been basically developed around their traditional areas. Where we're slightly away from it. And so we think that what SAMA is going to enable is to really enable the development of additional infrastructure, whether it's gathering infrastructure, midstream infrastructure, whether it's processing. This is fortunately a project of that size that will justify that first level of development. And the importance of that is when you look at the United States and when you look at gathering systems and offshore development in the US Gulf of Mexico, you realize that the way that deepwater happened, deepwater did not happen in a vacuum. Shallow water developed first. Deepwater leveraged the existing infrastructure that was developed for shallow water by tying back to that infrastructure. You did not have a pipeline that went from, call it, Houston to Perdido. You already had infrastructure that went to the shelf and then went to deepwater to basically, just to be precise, went to serve Hoover Diana with the Exxon system, and then it expanded south to deal with. That's how it grows. It grows in segments, leveraging what's already been built. SAMA, I think, is going to be an opportunity to build that first step. And as other companies that are further out, deeper, I think we're going to be providing a solution to something that's very important. And again, I cannot stress enough the importance of having access to proper midstream infrastructure because, you know, gas in Mexico is important. It's going to be very important in Southeast Mexico. And we all realize that, you know, we are going to have a way to handle that. And that kind of infrastructure, having that first leg of development, I think is going to, again, if you build it, they will come kind of scenario.
Very good. Luis?
Well, for the service provider to have this big developments is very good because in some way we will have more time for more work to do. Compared to that we having right now is short-term contracts, and then with this type of wells we will have probably a long-term contract that we don't have it right now. We see it that the way that we see it is that it's very important for the industry that the oil companies that they are obtaining this type of wells, they got the support from the government in order that they can be sure that they can work with Mexico and they will have a good result on all this development of the projects. As Paco said, it's very important the infrastructure that you may need in the future because some of them you may not be able to use the infrastructure from Pemex, and then that has to be developed together with the service providers that are in Mexico.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, we need all of the SAMAs that Mexico can offer. We need all of the Yamocas. We need all of the Cantareles. And let's not forget that we are partners in this. There are production sharing contracts, right? So we need to incentivize that the operations and the risk takers can streamline the operations as much as possible. So absolutely, I mean, if we don't incentivize that, we will not be able to discover the next big discovery. And let us remember, if you look at the 5-year plan, there are 96 blocks still pending for shallow water. If only a fraction, say less than 10%, say 8% of this, were to have the same success rate as Sama, that could potentially translate into doubling shallow water production that we have today. So it is on our best interest to ensure that everybody's happy in this end.
Thank you. We have only one question. It's from Ricardo from Bernard Schuttel, the Ship Management Mexico, and I think it's for you, Luis. And it says, how CAMEINTRAM visualize the ASEA affect owners and operators of vessels involved in hydrocarbon?
The experience that we have so far with ASEA has been satisfactory because in some way the rules that they are trying to apply is the ones that we have already in place. And the only thing that we have to work with together with them, that's actually we are doing, is having meetings with them, trying to direct the efforts in order to have a good result in inspections and on the requirements that they have for the environmental and contamination, all the things that they look for. And the way that we see this is that to keep the dialogue open with them all the time and trying to lead them in some way that they understand how the ship operations or the sea operations are done, and in that way try to solve and to have an easy life for everybody. We know that there are some requirements from them right now that for the shipping companies is difficult to obtain because, in fact, there are no regulators in Mexico that they can sometimes give us those certificates. And that's something that we are really discussing with them in order to prove that the requirements that they have, they are not really in direct online with the industry, and also not in the Mexican industry, but also international industry. And then in that way, we see that once we talk to them, they learn, and in some way they accept that they have to change the requirements that they have so far. And then the only way that we see this, to keep these discussions openly, and to try to solve all the issues that we may have with them.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if we have additional questions or... No. Okay, so we finished. Thank you very much for your time. Very, very good answers and apportation for each one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.